How's it going, class? So today we're going to be taking a look at 4.2. So that's chapter 4, lesson 2. And if you're following on the book, that's going to be on page 142. That's kind of neat right there. So today we're going to be talking about animal body plans. We're going to be focusing on how are animals' bodies organized, how is symmetry related to body structure. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a very simple way of organizing animals together. And so let's say we take an animal. The smallest thing we're going to deal with today, again, things get smaller, and get freakishly smaller than this, but we're going to start here until we get into genetics, is looking at a cell. And looking at a cell, as you guys remember, it's going to be, let's just draw a little cell right here. You have your little nucleus, and it's going to be performing specific functions. It's going to be a special type of cell that carries out a process. Maybe this is a muscle cell. Maybe this is a bone cell. Maybe this is a cell that makes up blood vessels. But that's the most basic one that we're going to be dealing with right now. That cell, when you get a lot of the same ones together, you create something called a tissue. And no, this isn't the type of tissue that you blow your boogers in or anything like that, or you need when you're watching the Twilight movies, because they're so terrible and you're crying, so you have to sit through it. No, this type of tissue is just a group of the same types of cells together performing a specific function. And so, again, if this cell was linked up with a whole bunch of cells of the exact same type, you create something called a tissue, just like how skin is made up of all these different skin cells. They're all combined together, performing the same function, so we call ours skin tissue. Now, the thing is, you can also bring tissue together, different types, and when you bring in different types of tissues that will all work towards a specific thing, you call this an organ. And the organs in your bodies are usually made up of a bunch of different types of tissues, and they work together to help perform a specific function. Now, if you get all those organs together, you can create something called an organ system. And this is when we're talking about a respiratory system or a circulatory system or a nervous system. And you think about your nervous system, it's made up of nerve cells, your backbone, and all that stuff goes into protecting it. You have your brain, you have different types of neurons, so you can have, we'll talk about this later, you have ones that receive information, one that passes information, one that interprets information. You get all these, you can combine similar ones together, create tissue. So you can have your brain tissue, you can have your somatic nerve tissue. You get all these ones together and you can create different types of organs. So your brain has different parts to it. So that's going to create an organ. And then when you get your spine, your spinal cord, your nerves, your sensory organs like in your eyes, your nose, you're going to create something called the organ system. You combine that. So again, the smallest is going to be cell, large is going to be organ system. So it goes through this order. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, since we have the organization all nice and neatly in order, we're going to be looking at symmetry. And what we're going to be doing right here is we're going to be looking at the three different types of symmetry. We're going to be looking at asymmetrical, we're going to be looking at radial, and we're going to be looking at bilateral. Okay, now this is actually going to be really simple, again, if you pay very close attention to little clues that it gives you inside the words. If you can remember what A means in science, what does that A mean? I'll give you a second to guess. If you guessed A means no, or none, then you are correct. So if I have asymmetry, or asymmetrical, it means I am not symmetrical. There's no symmetry in here. If I say I'm radial, you've probably heard this word before, and this is when we're talking about usually wheels or tires in cars. And so this is going to be, the best way to remember is just something like a circle, and I'll explain that more in a second. And bilateral, if you remember, bi means two, and lateral means down the middle. So we're saying that you have two equal halves down the middle. So let's go into this. So asymmetrical, let's take a look at something like a sponge. You might want to look on page 144 to follow along in this, because it'll give you the best clue on it. If you're looking at that sponge on that page, you can see is a horrible drawing, but a sponge can sometimes be shaped like this, and there's no symmetry. No matter where I cut this thing, and with one line, I cannot make one half match the other, and that's what symmetry is asking. can you get two different sides that match or multiple sides that match? And here, there's no way I could cut this thing in any direction that would make one side match the other. And so we call that asymmetry. You just can't do it. Now, whoops, get you out of here. Now, if we're looking at radial, what this is saying is it's saying that I can cut it here, it'll match. 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 I can cut it in multiple places, and it'll still match. And the same thing doesn't just have to be circles. If you're looking at something like that starfish down at the bottom, you can cut it in more than one spot. So I can cut it here, it'll match. 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 And so it's saying it's more than one place. I can cut it in multiple places and it'll still match. It doesn't mean it has to be infinite like on a wheel, but it has to be more than just one place I can cut it so it would be symmetrical to the other one. And the last one, bilateral, if it means two, radial means more than two, then you can guess that you'd only be able to cut it twice. So if we look at something like a butterfly, so I'm going to draw a really bad butterfly. Okay, that's a horrible butterfly, and he'd be a lot better, and this one would come out a little bit further. But if I were to cut it here, this side can match this side, but I can't cut it anywhere else. So it's only going to be straight down the middle. Humans were the same way. Let's say this is a student I particularly don't like, and I decide to take a sword and cut him straight down this way. I can make his left side match his right side. And so we call that bilateral symmetry, because you can cut it in one way and you get two equal halves. So that's what symmetry is all about. Now, when we get things like this, asymmetrical, radial, and bilateral, usually they actually do follow patterns. These two are going to be the simplest types of animals. So ones that have asymmetrical or radial symmetry are going to be very simple organisms. If you think back to some of the more basic ones like the sponges, the cnidarians, the worms, and even the mollusks, is they're going to be asymmetrical and radial. They're going to have radial symmetry. They're not going to be very complex. They're not going to have very complex brains or sensory organs. And if you're wondering what a sensory organ is, that's going to be your eyes, your nose for smelling, your brain, your ears for hearing. The more complex animals you're going to get are these ones, the bilateral. Now, the reason is because of where bilateral animals store most of their sensory organs, the way that they can interpret the world around them. And they're going to store it all near this, what we call the anterior region. And so you have the anterior, and then the opposite, which would be the bottom part, would be called the posterior. And the thing you have to understand with the posterior is that's going to be the back end, or in humans you think of like your butt end. So everything towards the head, the sensory organs all get pushed up whenever you're talking about bilateral animals. And so if you're ever thinking, if I gave you a question and I said, I have a sea star, I have a sponge, and I have a grasshopper, which one is the most complex animal when it comes to, I don't know, like organ systems, when it comes to thought process, stuff like that, you could immediately say, well, it would be the grasshopper because it's bilateral, and I know that they are more complex animals. You wouldn't even really have to know too much about each of them if you understood that usually when you have the bilateral, they're going to be, well, the bilateral ones are going to be more complex. They're going to have more complex organ systems. They're going to have more complex sensory. Their brains are going to be better developed, because like a sponge, does it have a brain? No. It just has little cells that all work together. And we'll talk more about that again, or you can go on the interweb and learn more about it. But okay, so that's the basics. Just a quick review, because there's a lot of stuff thrown at you today. You have cell, tissue, organ system, so it kind of goes up the chain. So remember, tissue is comprised of cells of the same type. Organs are comprised of tissues of different types, and organ systems are comprised of different organs that work together. For symmetry, it means equal parts. And so you have asymmetrical, that A means no, so there's no symmetry like a sponge. Radial means you can get multiple places that you can cut it to get symmetry. Bilateral means you can only cut it in one place and get two equal halves. And these guys are going to be the most advanced because all their sensory organs are pushed up towards the anterior region of the animal. And just for kicks and giggles, down here you have your posterior region. So, all right, until next time, I will talk to you guys later.